couple years ago, I was going to a community college up in the mountains in North Carolina. It wasn't exactly a party school, but there was this one hiking trail everyone went to on the weekends. It's not an official trail or anything, just this worn-down path that leads to an abandoned fire lookout tower. Pretty standard stuff. Anyway, one Friday night, my roommate Jake and I decided to head up there. We weren't big into the whole party scene, and honestly, the view from that tower at night was supposed to be insane. So we packed some beers, grabbed the flashlight, and started the trek around 10 p.m. The hike itself was pretty uneventful. It was a clear night, tons of stars, and we were just shooting the shit, typical guy stuff. We got to the tower maybe an hour later, a little out of breath, but nothing crazy. The tower itself was rickety, all rusted metal and creaking steps. We were kind of questioning our life choices halfway up, but the view from the top was 100% worth it. We hung out for a while, passing a joint back and forth, just enjoying the quiet and the view. That's when we noticed the radio. It was this old, beat-up emergency radio, the kind with a crank and a weather band, just sitting on a shelf in the corner. It looked like it had been there for decades, covered in dust and cobwebs. Jake, being Jake, immediately wanted to mess with it. I was hesitant, like, what if we accidentally sent out an SOS or something? But he was already cranking the thing, so whatever. He fiddled with the dial for a minute, static crackling through the speaker, and then a voice. It was faint, distorted, but definitely a voice. A woman's voice, I think. It was hard to make out what she was saying, but it sounded like she was in distress. We both froze, listening intently. The voice faded in and out, garbled by static, but there was definitely something off about it. It didn't sound right. Jake, ever the skeptic, figured it was some weird interference, maybe a radio signal from miles away bouncing off the mountains or something. I wasn't so sure. There was something about the voice. It felt close, like she was right there with us. We tried to tune the radio to get a better, clearer signal, but no luck. Just static and the occasional snippet of that distorted voice. After a while, it just stopped. Dead air. We looked at each other, both freaked out, obviously. We decided to pack it in. The whole vibe of the place had changed. The joint definitely didn't help either. As we were climbing down the tower, I swear I heard something move in the woods below. I stopped, shining the flashlight into the trees, but I couldn't see anything. Jake was like, "Dude, let's just go." And I couldn't really blame him. We practically ran down the trail, not stopping until we got back to the car. The whole drive back, we were silent, both trying to process what we just experienced. The next day, we told a few friends about it, but mostly got laughed at. We even considered going back to the tower to check the radio out again, but neither of us were really eager to do that. Here's the thing that really gets me, though. A few weeks later, we were hanging out in the student lounge, and I saw this flyer on the bulletin board. It was a missing person poster. A young woman, a hiker, had disappeared in the woods near the college a few months back. And the picture on that poster looked eerily familiar. I just stared at it, my blood running cold. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen that face before, but it wasn't from any party or class. Then it hit me. The eyes. The eyes on the poster were the same eyes I'd seen in my mind when I heard that voice on the radio. It was like my brain had somehow filled in the blanks, creating a face to go with the voice. That face was now staring back at me from this missing person poster. I showed the poster to Jake, and he went pale. We didn't say anything, but I knew he was thinking the same thing. Was it possible that the voice we heard on the radio belonged to this missing girl? Was she somehow trapped, lost, trying to reach out for help through that old broken radio? The thought sent shivers down my spine. We talked about going to the police, telling them about the radio and the voice, but what would we say? Hey, we were messing around in an abandoned fire tower and heard a spooky voice on a broken radio, and now we think it might be connected to this missing girl. They'd probably think we were crazy, or worse, involved somehow. So we did nothing. Kept the story to ourselves, mostly. Every now and again, late at night, I'd think about that voice, that face, and wonder what really happened to her. I'd wonder if she was still out there, somewhere in those woods, her voice forever echoing through the static of that old radio. And sometimes when the wind howls outside my window, I swear I can still hear her faint, desperate cry for help. My buddy Dominic and I, we do this whole get-away from the city camping trip every fall. No phones, no GPS, just us and a map, and whatever patch of wilderness we'd pick out, of course. This time we were up in the Adirondacks, somewhere way off the beaten path. We'd been hiking for hours, sun was starting to set, and we were about ready to just throw down our bags wherever and call it a night. That's when we stumbled upon this campsite. I mean, it was a campsite, Fire pit, a couple logs for sitting, the whole deal, but it was packed. There was a tent, one of those big canvas ones, looked like something out of an old movie. Folding chairs, a cooler, lantern hanging from a tree. Hell, there was even a cast iron pan sitting on the fire pit, with what looked like the remnants of some stew in it. It was like whoever had been there just vanished. Now, it's not like they could have just left this for a moment to go piss or something. It was pretty obvious that this campsite was abandoned. Leaves had claimed a lot of the surfaces, and it just all looked untouched. Dominic, he was all excited.
"Score, free supplies,"
he's saying, already poking around the tent. Me, I don't know, something felt off about it. It was too perfect, like a movie set or something. But it was getting dark and I wasn't about to argue. We checked the tent first. Sleeping bags, pillows, even a couple books and a deck of cards. It was like they just stepped away for a minute, and that minute turned into a month. The cooler was full of old moldy water, a few cans of soda and beer, some condiments, and a package of hot dogs that honestly wouldn't look half bad if it wasn't for the water. We figured, hey, finders keepers, right? They obviously didn't want it. Night rolls around and we're sitting by the fire, playing cards by the light of the lantern. Still felt weird, but I was starting to relax. Dominic, he's already snoring away in the tent. I'm about to turn in myself when I hear this rustling, like something moving around in the woods. Oh, I'm a city boy, born and raised, so every little noise in the woods sounds like a serial killer to me. But this was different. It was closer, like it was circling the campsite. I grabbed a log just in case and sat there listening. The rustling kept going, getting closer and closer until it was right outside the ring of firelight. I was frozen, heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it out there, watching me. And just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Dead silence. I sat there for another hour, probably more, log clutched in my hand, but nothing else happened. Finally, I crawled into the tent, figuring whatever it was, it had moved on. Slept like crap, kept waking up, thinking I heard something. In the morning, Dominic was all,
"Dude, you were tossing and turning all night. What's wrong with you?"
I told him about the rustling and he just laughed it off.
"Probably a raccoon,"
he said. We packed up our stuff, feeling a little weird about leaving the campsite exactly as we found it. But regardless of what he said, neither of us wanted to stick around. We hiked out, didn't talk about it much, but the whole thing stuck with me, the feeling of being watched, the way everything was just left there. A few days later, I'm back home trying to find a logical explanation for the whole thing. I start doing some digging online, looking at maps of the area, trying to figure out if there were any reports of weird stuff happening. And as it turns out, I did find something. An old news article, buried deep in some local paper's website. It was about a couple who had gone missing in the Adirondacks a few years back, same area we were in. The article said they were experienced hikers, well-equipped, just vanished without a trace. Their campsite was found abandoned, all their belongings left behind. And the picture of the campsite, it was the same one. The same tent, the same lantern, even the same damn cast iron pan. I never went back. Never even told Dominic about the article. Some things are better left unknown. Maybe 5 years ago now, I was in my early 20s and had just landed my first job out of college. To celebrate, a few buddies and I decided to head up the local mountains for a long weekend of camping and hiking. Enjoying my last few days of freedom, if you will. We found a secluded spot by a lake. No marked trails, no other campers, nothing. It was perfect. We get there Friday afternoon, set up camp, the whole 9 yards. We're talking tents, campfire, the works. We spent the rest of the day swimming, messing around in the woods, just enjoying being out in the middle of nowhere. As night fell, we got a fire going, cracked some beers, and just talked for hours. It was one of those perfect summer nights, stars out like crazy, the sound of the lake lapping against the shore, the crackle of the fire. Eventually, we all turned in for the night. I remember waking up at some point, though. Must have been 3 or 4 in the morning. I had to take a leak, so I crawled out of my tent. Did my business, and was about to head back in when I noticed something off. The campfire, which had been a good 20 feet from my tent when we went to sleep, was now maybe 10 feet away. I figured I was groggy and seeing things, so I crawled back into my tent and went back to sleep. The next morning I mentioned it to the guys, but they laughed it off.
"Dude, you were probably just half asleep."
My buddy Mark said.
"Or maybe the wind blew some embers around."
I shrugged it off, but it still bugged me a little bit. That day we went on a long hike, found this awesome waterfall, the whole bit. By the time we got back to camp, it was already getting dark. We made dinner, built the fire back up. This time, I made a point of measuring the distance from the fire to my tent. It was about 15 feet. I even piled some rocks around the fire pit just to be sure. Woke up in the middle of the night, and again, the fire was closer. Maybe 5 feet away this time. The rocks I'd placed around the fire pit were scattered everywhere. I was starting to get seriously freaked out. I stayed up the rest of the night just watching the fire, but nothing else happened. In the morning, I told the guys what happened. This time, they were a little more concerned. There was evidence of it now. We checked the area around the campsite, but there were no signs of animals or anything that could have moved the fire. We even considered packing up and leaving, but we'd driven for hours to get there, and none of us really wanted to cut the trip short. That day, we decided to stay close to camp. We went for a swim in the lake, played some cards, just tried to keep our minds off things, but the whole time, I couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong. As night fell, the tension was thick. We built the fire even further away from the tents this time, probably 30 feet. We also took turns staying watch, 2 guys at a time while the others slept. First watch was with Chris, another one of my buddies. We sat by the fire, talking in hushed voices, constantly scanning the woods around us. Nothing happened for hours, just the sound of the wind in the trees, an occasional owl hooting in the distance. Around 2 a.m., it was Mark and John's turn to take over. Chris and I crawled into our tents, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the sounds of the fire crackling and the guys talking. Then I heard it. A soft shuffling sound like something was dragging across the ground. I held my breath, straining to hear more. The shuffling sound got closer, then stopped right outside my tent. Why mine? I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I reached for my pocket knife, the only weapon that I had. Suddenly, the tent flap flew open. I gasped, scrambling back from the opening, but there was nothing there, just the darkness and the faint glow of the fire in the distance. I scrambled out of the tent, knife in hand. Mark and John were staring at me, their faces pale.
Did you hear that?
I whispered. They both nodded. We cautiously approached the fire. It was closer again, maybe 10 feet away, and this time there was something else. A circle of symbols had been drawn in the dirt around the fire pit. They looked almost like runes. I don't know. I'd never seen anything like them before. We were all completely freaked out at this point. We decided to pack up and get the hell out of there. We threw our stuff in our backpacks, barely bothering to take down the tents. We just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. As we were driving away, I looked back at the campsite. The fire was still burning, the flames casting flickering shadows on the trees. And in the center of that circle of symbols, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing there, watching us leave. Obviously, we never returned, and to this day I have no idea what was moving that fire, or who, or what, was drawing those symbols in the dirt. Hell, there was even a cast iron pit sitting in the fire pit. This time we were This time we were up in the... How do you say that, bro? Adirondacks? What? How do you say that? Adirondacks. Yeah, yeah.